Well, hey folks, I'm Josh. Welcome back to the shop. Today, we're going to take a little time to compare the Flexcut carving jack, which is a very versatile, lots of different tools carving knife that you can purchase, and this old-timer knife that has very similar tools. This old-timer you can find it under a couple of different names depending on where you are and where you're looking. You might find it under the old-timer 240T. That's old-timer 240 and a T, like Tom. And then sometimes you find it under Charade old-timer Splinter, like, you know, splinter in your finger when you're a piece of wood. So the Charade old-timer Splinter carving knife. And so there's a couple of things about them that are very, very, very similar. First of all, the tools on them are the same shape essentially and the same locations on the knife. So on the right side, if we want to call this the right side, we have, here you can see you have a spoon knife, a small gouge that's cranked to the side, and you have a gouge that's straight. So you can kind of see those tools there. And it's the same on the old-timer. So there you go. There's the spoon, the gouge, and the other gouge. So those are, you know, essentially the same tools, very similar sizes to them, and they're actually the same, well, they claim to be the same material. Flexcut, these blades are all made from a high carbon spring steel, and so are the blades of the old-timer. And then on the other side, we have just a chisel edge, the actual knife edge, and a V-gouge that is then cranked off to the side. And we have the same tools on the Flexcut. So there you go, you have chisel, knife, V-gouge. And that's pretty slick. That's a really great set of tools. You can do a lot of carving on the go with these knives. A lot of options, a lot of blade shapes and sizes, and you can do some pretty unique stuff. One issue that you sometimes run into is clearance on the handle. Like is a spoon, if you have much of a lip on your spoon, you may not have enough room to get your knife in there very far, but I haven't run into that too much. So that's not so bad on either of them. But other comparisons, one major drawback of the old-timer knife is the quality of the sharpening done on these. And so here's just the blade, and you can see I have not used this yet, and you can see that's a janky edge. That is just not good quality. You can see the grind marks in there. It's not flat. If you look really close, it's not a straight edge, and you can see the jaggedness in that upper chunk there. And let's compare that to the immaculately sharpened blade from Flexcut. Now, I have used these tools on this Flexcut quite a bit, but they came from the factory, you know, this kind of sharp. All Flexcut tools do. They come polished and just, you know, hair splitting sharp, which is how you want your carving knives to be. So that's one huge drawback on the old-timer, is that they are just not anywhere near the sharpening level. And now that's true of all the blades. The quality of the sharpening on the two knives is very evident when you take a look at the V-gouge. That's, I would call it like a cranked V-gouge because it goes off to the side. So here you can see the Flexcut with a very nice, clean, polished, sharp edge. Now, I have used this knife quite a bit, but that's how it came from the factory. I mean, I have maintained that edge, but I have not had to resharpen it. I did not have to sharpen it initially. It came from the factory super sharp, ready to use just like that. And if we compare that to the blade, to the cranked V-gouge on this old timer, this thing is almost funny how bad this is. So if we look at this angle, you can see the right side is kind of comes back a little bit, but the left side like juts forward. Like that's horrendous. And then if you look at the bottom, you can see how bad that is. You can see the grind marks. You can see it was just touched on the grinder like 3 times. And so that's not usable. That's not close to usable. That's just dangerous. That's what that is. So what I'm gonna do now is, if you're in the group of people that is confident in their sharpening skills and their ability to take a knife from this kind of condition and potentially get those blades to like this level of sharp, then you may want to consider this knife. If you're not in that group, if you aren't confident in your ability to sharpen a knife, or you don't have somebody you could give it to have them sharpen it for you, and that includes the unusual shapes here, I think the choice is already ruling this one out, because if you aren't confident in being able to take these to a good level of use, then there's no reason to purchase this knife. So I'm going to take the time to sharpen all the blades on this, which is going to be a little bit, but we'll be able to actually compare, once that blade is in a good condition, how good are these two knives. So I obviously will not film all of that because that would just take forever. So I will sharpen all these up and we will be back. Well, here we are several hours later and one broken blade. I got everything on here as sharp as it can be. At least as sharp as I'm going to get it for now. And I really honestly got to say, I am a little bit impressed with how well this ended up working out. I kind of really didn't really think I would have anything nice to say about this knife, but I have found that it's really not all that bad, with the exception of a couple of things. So let's first kind of touch on some of those things that were not so good. So, as I mentioned, broken blade. There was once a chisel blade on there that looked something like this one. So it was the one that was meant to be like that, and it didn't survive. So when it was opening and closing, there was blade rub. It was rubbing on this blade and it was rubbing on this blade because it was bent up. And so I didn't figure this would end up working out, but I figured I didn't want it in there if it was going to mess up these other blades, because it's kind of the least, the one that I use the least on this knife. So I wasn't as concerned about, well, if it does break by trying to bend it, then I wouldn't be that upset. But unfortunately, it's hardened spring steel, so it doesn't have much give, and it really didn't take very much. I didn't even put much pressure on it, and it just snapped off. So I don't know, win, lose. It's not going to rub and ruin the edges on these two, but it's also, I now don't have a chisel. But that said, the chisel on this knife is the only one of the 2 tools that's designed to be used in a pushing motion. And if you don't have a locking blade like you do on this knife, so on the Flexcut, the blades lock. As you can see, this right here is the lock mechanism, and they all have a little notch in there that this locks into, and then to close them you have to press, you have to activate that, and then you can fold the blade closed. Well, with it open, it isn't gonna close up on you, and you can actually kind of hold the handle and push the tool. But this one, if you're gonna use a push tool, you can't just push from back here on the handle, because it's gonna fold. The pressure will, you can't trust that it's gonna stay open. So you have to choke way up on it, and to safely use this, you have to hold way up here so that you got pressure on the handle, or pressure on the blade, so that it doesn't fold up on you. Because if you just go like this, there's a chance it's gonna fold, which, so really the push tools on this knife, not that great anyway. So not a huge loss that it's gone, but it's gone. So as you can see, I got the blades good and sharp. The V tool was definitely the biggest challenge of those, to get it nice and clean, but they are all good and sharp now, and they all cut pretty good. We'll do a little, just to kind of show Here's this, the old timer knife in some cherry. Doesn't have any trouble cutting through cherry, and cherry's pretty hard. At least in my book, that's about as hard as I want to be carving with a hand tool. So that's pretty good. Nice clean faceted cut. And to compare it to the blade, there we go. On the Flexcut, I mean, the Flexcut blade is probably a little bit better, but that might just be the way it's sharpened, the angles it's at. I didn't exactly match those, and so if I wanted this knife to cut really well in cherry, I might have to adjust the sharpening angles a little bit. But ultimately, it cuts. And then to see it in something soft, here's just a hunk of scrap basswood. No trouble on the end grain. Nice clean shaving on there. And if we go, that cuts quite well. No complaints from me there. That's a very usable blade. And so comparison wise, the Flexcut is a much more aggressive knife in my opinion, but the other knife is fully functional. Don't have any trouble using it. And then just one more for this. Oh, let's do the spoon knife. So the spoon knife, do it on this cherry here. The trouble with the spoon knife on this is you have such a small amount of handle clearance that you run into the handle, which is a bummer. It'd be nice if it had a little bit more reach to it, but I understand you're limited by, what you got. But just for the sake of seeing it, here's the spoon on this one as well. And it does just fine. No trouble cutting there. No trouble at all. Take a fresh spot. So that's great. The tools are, if you put in the time, and really this did take me quite a while, if you put in the time to sharpen up the tools on the old timer, they are acceptable. They're not as good as the tools on the Flexcut. If you compare, you can tell the steel on the Flexcut is thicker. Not so much so that it's huge, but enough that these blades have a little bit of flex, whereas the Flexcut blades, they really don't move very much. So, you got to kind of bear that in mind when you're using the knife. But that doesn't really detract from the functionality of this knife. It just means that the quality of the Flexcut is a little better. Thicker steel, doesn't have any give or wiggle. One thing that I really like about the old timer knife is, if you look, you can see, if you look kind of down in the end here, this is a slip joint knife. Each one of these is an individual spring for each blade, and that's true on both sides. And then between each blade, there's actually a little brass washer in there. And what that does is it means that they are really quite easy, well, the broken one here, quite easy to open with, you get just one tool at a time. It's really quite smooth and slick, I gotta say. A really nice, easy opening experience, as opposed to the Flexcut, which other than the spoon knife on mine, so the spoon knife you can get by itself. Now look at that, no trouble, just opened it up, no big deal, the other ones didn't come with it. Well, that's because it's the only tool on mine that has a spacer in between the blades. There's a little bit of a washer in there. As opposed to all the other tools, they rest right against each other, which I have oiled and used this knife quite a bit, but you still cannot get one blade easily. You really have to like hold the other ones down while you pull this one out. And so that's kind of annoying. In particular, the knife blade is really quite a challenge to get out, as you watched me try to get it out earlier. I mean, this is an opportunity to nick yourself if you're not careful. So, and it's not a quick tool change. You really gotta, there we go. It takes time to switch between the tools, which is kind of annoying, as opposed to this one. I mean, here, look at this. Whoop, no problem. You wanna switch to the V-gouge? No big deal. really nice quick tool transitions, which I appreciate. I feel like, you know, giving up the thickness of the tools in order to fit the spacers in between those, not a bad trade-off. Although, as I said before, any of the push tools on this knife are really not super functional. The push tools on this one I feel a little more comfortable using because of the locks. I don't mind using a non-locking knife or any of the tools that you're going to use kind of in a cranked action. You know, it's not a big deal to me that this doesn't lock, because the only way you're going to cut it's not going to close up on you, so it's really not a big deal. But for the push tools, the locking function is nice. Other things, you have to be careful with the Flexcut knife when you're closing the tools. If you do it wrong, you can actually get them in there too far and you'll kind of jam up the lock, and so that's kind of annoying. So it's just something to be aware of. And one other thing I had to do to the old timer knife to make myself feel better about using it is when I had finished sharpening everything, I got to looking at it and I noticed some of the blades sat high. So like if you look, this gouge here, when it was closed, was sitting right about there, which if you look, it's sticking up a little bit. And I found that when I was holding the knife, I could feel that edge right here on my fingers, you know, on my hand, and that was not at all nice. So what I did is I opened that up, and you can see the stop right here is shiny. Well, that's because this is an auger bit file. It's just a Nicholson brand, nothing super fancy yet. You can pick them up, oh, you know, like $10 somewhere if you have a place. I think I got it at Ace Hardware, believe it or not. And so that's an auger bit file, but you can find them online as well. And they're designed to be used to sharpen, you know, big spiral auger bits. And they have they have smooth sides, and then they have cutting edges. And so one side, it cuts here and not on the side. Same on that. But then if you flip it over, you have a cutting edge on the thin side and then no cutting edge on the flat side, which is really nice because you could just set this in here and you won't grind away the sides at all of your tools or anything, because there's no grinding surface right here. But look at that, right on the edge, and you just put it in here and you file that down a little bit, and then you can lower the close, and now it closes down below the bolster, the sides of the knife. And the same thing was true for the blade on this one. You can see I had to file it down. You can see where I filed so that it closed all the way down, because its closed position was about right there, which was enough to be kind of scary, actually. And part of that's just because in sharpening it, I shortened the blade, but not very much. So, you know, that right there would just gouge you if you weren't careful while holding it. So I lowered it. Now it sits down a little bit better. And so that's a pretty easy fix, but it's something that, you know, I did not have to do that on the Flexcut knife. The Flexcut knife, you know, everything's closed and clean, and there's no way to, as long as you make sure all the tools are pushed all the way down, because there is no spring to make sure they pull in like on these. If you get them close, they snap in, right? You get it close to where it should be, and it goes down in, and you don't got to worry about it. Well, these guys, they just sit there. So you got to make sure when you're closing it up, like this chisel in particular can be dangerous, you know, because it sits right there. And if you don't get it all the way down in there and you slide your hand across that, you now have a need for stitches. So be careful that you get all your tools pushed all the way closed. So in transitioning between tools, the old timer definitely wins because it's a little bit safer and easier to open, whereas this, you got to kind of take your time and be careful opening and closing tools. Locking function, this one wins. This one doesn't lock at all. You know, overall quality, the Flexcut is definitely a better knife, but it's also way more expensive. This is in the neighborhood of $20 for this old timer. Whereas the Flexcut knife is, oh gosh, I think about 115, give or take, depending on where you find it and, you know, what time of year it is. So, I mean, that's a huge price difference, right? I mean, that's really big. One thing also to consider, though, is if you get the Flexcut knife, you don't have to put any time into it sharpening it. It is ready to go out of the package, and it comes with a belt sheath, you know, which is kind of nice because this isn't really a pocketable knife. I don't know, some people might put this in their pocket, but I'm not putting this in my pocket. That's too big. So it's nice to have the little sheath to carry it in and keep it safe. So it comes with that, at least the one that I bought did. Then it also comes with a strap and some compound, some polishing compound to rub on your strop. But the nice thing about this strop is that it is specific to this knife, really. So like, for example, let's get the V tool out here. So there's the V tool, and if you look down the barrel there, you can see lines up perfectly with that V tool, which is nice, because then you have a nice, perfectly made strop for like the inside edges of that tool. And then actually see the V going this way too matches, so you can use that to keep your tools in good shape, which is nice, because if you buy this knife, you'll have to find some other way of keeping all those things sharp, which straight edges not so hard, but like the curved edges of, for example, the gouge, it's harder to get inside there. It's not too hard to do the outside. You can do that on a flat surface, but to do the inside surface, you do need some kind of a rounded, you know, something like this to get that inside surface polished up just a little bit for the touching up of edges and things like that. So the strop is nice, and of course you can make one, but to save yourself the time, if you have the money, it is a nice thing that comes with the Flexcut knife. So, you know, all in all, at the end of the day, if you can afford the Flexcut knife and you don't mind futzing with the opening mechanism where you gotta kind of push down on other tools to get one tool out, the Flexcut knife, I mean, you know, the Flexcut knife is better. It also costs way more at $115-ish, give or take. It's a quite a bit more expensive knife, but you get some stuff to go with it, and you get, you know, thicker steel on your knives and a little bit better quality, of course. The finish is better, you get locking blades, that kind of thing. So that's nice, but you're paying for it, you know. But if you think that you know, you have more time than you do money, the old-timer 240T Splinter, sometimes they call it, is not a terrible knife. If you can put in the time to sharpen your edges, and you know how to get a good sharp edge on these kind of unusual shapes, then you can have yourself a pretty darn good multi-purpose carving knife without too much money, because I think this thing is about 20 bucks. And you know, the only tool that it really matters that you don't have a lock for is the gouge, you know, the one that you would push with, and of course the chisel, which I broke off, so don't break yours off. And you know, for 20 bucks, if you're willing to put in a couple hours to kind of you know, file down some of the stops and sharpen all the tools, you can end up with a pretty useful tool. Or if you're like me and you get a really nice one for a gift, and then you pick this one up just to see what it's like, as you know, to putz around with and play with. You know, I can throw this, I don't know, maybe this will live in the car or something for impromptu carving sessions and things like that. But never hurts to have another one around somewhere. So, you know, I have both. But I hope this kind of helps you make a decision if you're looking at the two. You know, they both have their place. I'm not going to actually say that one is for sure better than the other because of the massive price difference. This one hits a niche, that's for sure. If I had to pick just one and there wasn't a price factor, I mean, it would for sure be the Flexcut, because it's just a better tool all around. But all things considered, and if I was on a budget, I would at least consider the old timer, because it can fill a similar role, that's for sure. So anyway, that's about it for this one. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.